stepmother called me selfish for the first time when I was 9 years old. I had eaten the last of the strawberry yogurt before my stepsister could have it. 23 years later, sitting across from her at a folding table in my father's hospice room, she used the same word. This time, she wanted me to sign over my inheritance. I didn't sign anything. I just looked at my aunt, who was standing quietly by the window, and gave her a small nod. My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old. I work as a forensic archivist for a mid-sized insurance firm in Columbus, Ohio, which is a job that most people's eyes glaze over when I describe it at parties. What it means practically is that I spend my days reconstructing paper trails. I find what people tried to hide. I verify what people claim is authentic. I have a very high tolerance for fine print and a very low tolerance for people who think documents don't matter. My father, Robert, was a quiet man who loved woodworking and bad westerns and never learned how to argue without leaving the room first. He married my stepmother, Diane, when I was 7, 2 years after my mother passed. Diane had a daughter from her first marriage, my stepsister, Brooke, who was 4 years older than me and had the particular energy of someone who has always been told she is exceptional without being given specific evidence. For most of my childhood, I tried to make it work. I set the table without being asked. I stayed out of Brooke's room. I got good grades and didn't make noise and generally operated like a piece of furniture that was also occasionally helpful. It didn't matter. I was always the afterthought, the practical one, the one who didn't need as much because I didn't complain when I didn't get it. When my father was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's at 61, Diane cried for 3 days and then started calling me, not to grieve together, to coordinate. She needed someone to drive him to physical therapy on Tuesdays and Thursdays, someone to manage the medication schedule, someone to call the insurance company when they denied the occupational therapy referral for the 4th time, which required 45 minutes on hold, and a level of controlled fury that only I seemed capable of sustaining. Brooke, Diane explained, had the kids. She had the house. She had so much on her plate already. I was single. I worked from home 3 days a week. I didn't have kids. I had, in Diane's phrasing, flexibility. So I became the flexibility. So I became the flexible one. For 2 years, I reorganized my entire life around my father's decline. I drove 90 minutes round trip twice a week. I learned the names of every nurse on his floor, what made them laugh, which ones were more responsive to requests after 10 a.m. I learned to speak the bureaucratic language of insurance appeals, Medicare supplemental coverage, and hospice transition paperwork. I sat with him through the nights when the tremors were bad and he couldn't sleep, and we watched old westerns together with the volume low so we wouldn't wake Diane. He talked to me in those nights about his own father who had been hard and distant, about regrets he'd never said out loud, about a savings account he had opened years ago, quietly, without telling Diane, because he'd watched her spend through 2 refinances and he wanted to make sure there was something left that couldn't be argued over. "It's yours, Claire Bear," he said one night during a lucid stretch in February. "All of it. Your aunt knows. She helped me set it up right. My Aunt Carol, his older sister, is a retired estate planning attorney. She is the kind of woman who keeps a legal pad in her purse and has opinions about notarization. My father trusted her completely. He passed in April on a Tuesday while the dogwoods were blooming outside his window. The text from Diane came 6 days later. "We need to sit down as a family. Brooke and Marcus are coming Saturday. Your father would have wanted us all together." There was no "how are you holding up?" No, I know this is hard, just a summons with a thin coating of sentiment over it. I brought coffee because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Brooke and her husband Marcus were already there when I arrived. Marcus had the aggressively relaxed posture of a man who has never personally experienced financial consequences. Brooke was wearing the kind of outfit people wear when they want to look like they aren't trying too hard, but have definitely tried. She hugged me for exactly 2 seconds, which is the hug of someone completing a task. We sat in the living room. Diane had set out a cheese plate, which I found both thoughtful and ominous. "We've been going over things," Diane started, folding her hands on her lap. With Robert gone, there are some decisions to make about the house, about the accounts, about the future. I waited. We found some paperwork, she continued, glancing at Brooke. From Robert's financial planner. There's a savings account, about $240,000. I kept my face still. Now, the way Robert had things set up was very informal, Diane said, her voice taking on the careful tone of someone who has rehearsed this part. He wasn't always the most organized, and honestly, toward the end, he wasn't always thinking clearly. I just want us to be realistic about that. There it was. He was thinking clearly, I said. I was with him. You were wonderful, Diane said warmly. You really were, and that's actually what we wanted to talk about. How much you sacrificed, how much you gave, and we think you deserve to be recognized for that, which is why we think it makes sense for you to take the furniture, the woodworking tools, whatever personal items feel meaningful to you. I looked at Brooke. She was studying the cheese plate. And the savings account? I asked. Well, Diane exhaled slowly. Marcus and Brooke have the kids. The mortgage situation it's complicated right now. And honestly, Claire, your father would have wanted to see his grandchildren secure. Brooke's youngest starts kindergarten next fall. Private school, the good district. You know how important that is to Robert. Robert never met Brooke's youngest, I said. Brief silence. He would have adored him, Diane said firmly. So you're telling me, I said slowly, that the money my father saved and specifically designated, his words, not mine, is going to fund private school tuition. It's family money, Marcus said. First words he'd spoken directly to me. It belongs to the family. I looked at him. He had the nerve to look slightly bored. We're not trying to be unfair, Brooke said, finally engaging, leaning forward with an expression she probably used at work when she needed to seem reasonable. We're just saying that you're in a good place, Claire. You have your career. You have your career. You have your apartment. You're stable. We're in a growth phase right now. A growth phase. I thought about the Tuesday nights when I sat on the edge of my father's hospice bed and helped him sip water through a straw because his hands couldn't manage the cup reliably. I thought about the insurance appeal I filed 3 times before it finally went through, the one that got him the in-home therapy that gave him back 6 months of partial independence. I thought about the morning I missed my best friend's wedding shower because my father had a bad night and I didn't want him waking up alone. Brooke had been to one of the hospice visits. One. She had stayed for 45 minutes and cried loudly in the hallway, which the nurses had to manage. I took a slow breath. The anger was there, hot and specific, but underneath it was something else. A coldness. The kind that comes when you realize you've been watching something approach for a very long time and it has finally arrived. I need to think about this, I said. Of course, Diane said graciously. I picked up my coat. I didn't take any cheese. You have to understand something about Aunt Carol. She is 71 years old. She drives a sensible sedan and wears reading glasses on a beaded chain and has the energy of someone who has been professionally unimpressed by nonsense for 5 decades. She was my father's fiercest protector, and she is, categorically, the last person any of them should have forgotten to account for. She called me before I got home. They called you over, she said. It wasn't a question. They did. And they told you the money was informal, that Robert wasn't thinking clearly. More or less. She was quiet for a moment. Sweetheart, I need you to come to my house tomorrow. There's something I need to show you. The next afternoon, I sat at her kitchen table while she spread documents across it with the methodical calm of someone building a case, which I would come to understand is exactly what she was doing. My father had not been informal. My father had been, with Aunt Carol's guidance, extremely precise. The account was held inside a revocable living trust he'd established 3 years earlier, quietly, while Diane thought he was at a dentist appointment. The trust named me as the sole beneficiary. It had been drafted, witnessed, and notarized with the kind of thoroughness that made it essentially bulletproof. There was also, tucked inside the blue folder Carol set in front of me, A letter in my father's handwriting, dated 14 months before he died, in which he explained why. I couldn't read all of it without my eyes blurring over, but I read enough. Diane is a good woman in many ways, but she has never been able to tell the difference between love and transaction. I have watched her do to Brooke what her mother did to her teacher, that the people who love you are the ones who give you things. I don't want that for Claire. I want Claire to have a foundation that no one can negotiate away from her. He knew, I said. He knew, Carol agreed. He also knew that when he was gone, there would be a conversation very much like the one you just had. He asked me to be ready. She had been ready. She pulled out a second set of documents. These were her own research, supplemented by a friend who worked in county records. While running the routine estate inventory, Carol had discovered something that changed the entire texture of what Diane was attempting. The house Robert and Diane lived in had a second mortgage on it, a HELOC taken out 18 months ago, that Diane had never mentioned to my father. The balance was significant. The monthly payments were, based on everything Carol could see, 2 months behind. There was more. Carol had found a chain of Venmo transfers and informal loans, Robert's own records, kept in a small notebook she'd found in his desk, which Diane apparently hadn't thought to check, totaling nearly $60,000 given to Brooke and Marcus over the past 4 years. Home repairs that weren't repaid, a car loan co-signed and then quietly defaulted on, emergency cash that always came with the word temporary and never came back. My father had written next to each entry, in his quiet, careful handwriting, paid in full, no return expected. He wasn't angry. He was just documenting. They weren't just going to take your inheritance, Carol said, removing her reading glasses and setting them on the table. They needed it. The wedding. Brooke's vow renewal, I said. She mentioned that last month. They're doing a big vow renewal for their 10th anniversary. Venue deposit. The venue deposit was already paid, Carol said flatly. With a card in Robert's name that Diane had as an authorized user, she made the charge 2 weeks before he passed. The room went very quiet. I felt sick, not just angry, actually nauseated, in the way you get when something you suspected turns out to be worse than you thought. That's unauthorized use of an account belonging to a person who was in hospice, I said carefully. That's one way to describe it, Carol said. We sat with that for a moment. They're going to keep pushing, I said. They already called me, Carol said, and something in her voice told me it hadn't been a pleasant call. Diane told me I had manipulated Robert, that he wasn't competent when he signed the trust. She used the word exploited. I stared at her. She's going to try to contest it, Carol said. She doesn't have the grounds, but she's going to try. And in the meantime, she's going to work the family. You'll start hearing from cousins. You'll be the bitter stepdaughter who's dragging Robert's memory through a legal fight. She was right. Within 4 days, I had 3 texts from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. 2 of them used the phrase, what Robert would have wanted. One of them mentioned how hard this was for Brooke, who had the kids. I didn't respond. I was busy. Because Carol had also shown me something else. In the notebook, tucked behind the loan records, was a single page in my father's handwriting that listed, in neat columns, the dates and amounts of every time Diane had come to him with a financial problem over their 23-year marriage. Refinances, credit card payoffs, business loans for Marcus's ventures, none of which had survived more than 18 months. The total, when Carol ran the figures with interest, was well over $100,000. None of it had been repaid. Not $1. My father had known this. He had written it down. He had not said a word about it to Diane because he wasn't that kind of man. He just quietly protected what he could. I drove to the venue, not to make a scene. I wasn't my mother. What I needed was to understand the scope of what Diane had committed. The event coordinator was professional and courteous, and when I explained that I was the trustee representative following up on an event deposit made on an account belonging to Robert Whitmore's estate, she was suddenly very forthcoming. The deposit had been made on a Visa card ending in a number I recognized from my father's files. It was a significant amount. The event was scheduled for late July, 120 guests, the whole thing. I thanked her and left. I called Carol from the parking lot. They've already spent it in their heads, I said. They spent it literally, Carol said. The question is what we do now. I want to tell Brooke, I said. Not out of cruelty, something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like the impulse that made me check on my father in the night, that made me sit with people when they were confused and scared. Not because it helps us legally. I need to know if she knows. Carol was quiet for a moment. I'll come with you. We went on a Wednesday afternoon. Brooke's house was in a suburb west of Columbus, the kind of neighborhood with good curb appeal and, apparently, a great deal of financial stress behind it. She answered the door in workout clothes, kids in the background, and when she saw me, she went still. "Can we come in?" I said. She let us in. She put the kids in the playroom. She sat across from us at the kitchen island and looked at Carol the way people look at someone they've been warned about. I told her everything. Not the legal strategy, just the facts. The HELOC, the credit card charge, the notebook. Brooke listened with her arms crossed, and for a while I genuinely couldn't tell if she was going to deny it or deflect or cry. She did all three, but not in the order I expected. "I didn't know about the credit card," she said. Her voice was flat. "I believe you," I said. "The HELOC, I knew something was wrong with the house finances. Marcus kept saying it was fine." She looked at the table. "He says everything is fine until it catastrophically isn't." Brooke. I waited until she looked up. "They paid the venue deposit with Dad's card 2 weeks before he died." She closed her eyes. "If that charge is contested as unauthorized, and I think it would be, the venue contract falls apart. You don't have the funds to resecure it. The event doesn't happen." "Mom did this," she said quietly. Not a question. She had access to the account. It was her signature on the charge. Brooke pressed her fingers against her forehead. For a moment, she looked nothing like the person who had sat across from me with the cheese plate and told me I was stable. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been told her whole life that the world would arrange itself around her and was beginning to notice that it hadn't. "I've been paying for things I didn't earn," she said suddenly. I mean, I've known that. I just didn't want to say it out loud." Carol set a box of tissues on the counter without comment. 20 years of estate law had prepared her for exactly this kind of kitchen table. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said. "The trust is valid. The money is protected. But there's a charge on an estate account that needs to be addressed, and I can't pretend I don't know about it." "What do you want from me?" "I want you to talk to Marcus. I want to know whether he knew about the card." "He didn't," she said, and she said it with the certainty of someone who has just decided something. "He's careless, but he's not. He wouldn't have let her do that. Then when this comes out, and it will come out, I need you on the right side of it." She looked at me for a long moment. "What does that mean?" "It means don't back Diane's story that my father wasn't competent when he set up the trust, because he was, and because the alternative is that this becomes a legal proceeding that none of us can afford emotionally or financially." She nodded slowly. The fight had gone out of her, not surrendered, dissolved, like something that had been held up by a structure that just gave way. I drove home in the rain and called Carol and told her what happened. "Good," Carol said simply. 2 days later, Diane called. I was ready for it. I set the phone on the counter, put it on speaker, and picked up my tea. "Claire." Her voice was controlled, the way it got when she was managing a situation. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I've been talking to an attorney about the trust, and I want you to know that we're prepared to challenge it. Robert had good days and bad days, you know that. Some of those documents—" "Diane," I said, "I know about the HELOC." Silence. "And I know about the credit card charge for March 22nd, I said. "The venue deposit, $12,000 on an account belonging to my father's estate made while he was in hospice." Her breathing was audible. That was a misunderstanding, she said. I was an authorized user. I was handling household accounts. An event venue isn't a household account. The card was linked to the family finances. I was Diane, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. I'm not calling to argue. I'm calling to tell you that Carol is filing the formal estate inventory next week, and that charge will be part of the review. If you'd like to address it proactively with Carol before that happens, she's available Thursday morning. Long silence. You're really going to do this, she said. Her voice had changed. The management was gone. What was left was quieter and uglier. I'm following the process my father set up, I said. He was very clear about it. He was dying, she snapped. People say things when they're dying. They make promises they can't actually understand. He loved me. He would not have wanted. He wrote you a letter, I said. She went silent. Carol has it. It's part of the estate documents. He left one for Brooke too. I haven't read either of them. That's between you and what he chose to say. I paused. But he also left one for me. And I read mine, and I know exactly what he wanted. I heard her exhale, a long, unraveling sound. The venue deposit, I said, softer now, because I am my father's daughter, and cruelty doesn't come easily. Brooke didn't know. Whatever you decide about the rest of it, she deserves to have her anniversary. Figure out how to make that right for her. I hung up. Carol called me 10 minutes later. She called me, Carol said. She wants to meet Thursday. Good, Claire. Her voice was warm. Your father would be beside himself. Proud or horrified? Both, probably. He was always more sentimental than he let on. The meeting on Thursday was brief and, for the most part, quiet. Diane came alone. She sat across from Carol in Carol's home office, surrounded by the quiet industry of decades of legal work filing cabinets, bound case folders, the particular smell of serious paperwork, and I sat to Carol's left and didn't speak unless spoken to. Diane did not contest the trust. She acknowledged the credit card charge, agreed to reimburse the estate, and signed a document Carol had prepared that formalized the loan history from my father's notebook as a debt against her portion of the marital assets. After everything was calculated, the HELOC status, the outstanding informal loans, the estate reimbursement, her remaining claim on the estate was modest. Not nothing, but not $240,000. She looked older than I had ever seen her. Not beaten, exactly. More like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had finally set it down in the wrong place. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. And underneath the tiredness, something quieter. The fallout settled over the following weeks like sediment after a storm. Marcus, to his credit, handled it better than I expected, or at least Brooke told me so. He'd had his own accounting conversation with her after I'd come to the house, and some things had been said that apparently needed saying for years. The vow renewal was scaled back, moved to a friend's backyard, 30 people instead of 120. Brooke texted me a photo of the invitation. Simple is better anyway, she wrote. Dad always said that. He did. He said it about a lot of things. I didn't go to the vow renewal. I sent flowers. A month after the estate was finalized, I took a Saturday and drove to the nursery near my father's old house. I bought 2 dogwood saplings, the kind that had been blooming outside his hospice window when he passed. I planted one in front of my apartment building. The landlord owed me a favor, and I mailed the other one, roots bored in burlap, to Brooke with a note that said only, "From Dad's window. Plant it somewhere you can see it." She called me the same night. We talked for an hour and a half about things neither of us had ever said, which is a different kind of conversation entirely. The trust dispersed in early September. I didn't buy anything dramatic. I paid off my car. I set aside a portion for a graduate certificate in document forensics I'd been putting off for 3 years, and I put a deposit on a small craftsman house, 2 towns over, nothing fancy, wooden floors that needed refinishing, a narrow staircase, A backyard with an old oak tree that had clearly been there for 50 years before anyone thought to put a house next to it. On the first night I slept there, I unpacked the last box before I set up the bed. It was my father's woodworking tools. I didn't have the skills to use most of them yet, but I set them on the workbench in the garage anyway, arranged the way he kept them, handles out, by size. He had been trying to teach me to use the hand plane in those last good months before the tremors made it impossible. I had been a slow student. I thought that maybe eventually I would get it. My phone buzzed on the floor next to my sleeping bag. It was Brooke. Planted the dogwood. Marcus dug the hole. Kids helped. It looks right. I set the phone down and looked up at the ceiling of the room that was finally, unambiguously, mine. He had been right about the money. It wasn't really the money. It was the proof that someone had seen me clearly and made something permanent out of it and trusted it to hold. It held. I keep coming back to the notebook, not the trust documents, not the forensic report, not the foreclosure notice, the notebook, this small water-stained thing my father kept in the back of his desk drawer where he recorded every dollar he quietly gave away and never expected back. He didn't write those entries out of bitterness. He wrote them the way he did everything, carefully, without drama, because he believed that the truth deserved to be somewhere even if nobody was looking at it. That's the thing nobody tells you about integrity. It doesn't announce itself. My father never confronted Diane about the money she spent. He never sat Brooke down and listed what had been given and never returned. He just kept his own record, protected what he could, and trusted that eventually the ledger would matter. It did, not because the universe has some automatic justice mechanism built in. I don't believe that. And I don't think he did either. It mattered because he was methodical enough to make it matter. He understood that good intentions without documentation are just wishes. I think about that when people say that being the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who shows up without being asked, is somehow a weakness. For years I absorbed that story about myself. I was the stable one, the flexible one, the one without enough happening in her own life to justify inconvenience. And because I believed some version of it, I kept showing up anyway, kept driving the 90 minutes, kept staying on hold with the insurance company, kept sitting in the dark watching westerns with the volume low, not because I expected reward, just because it was right. That consistency, doing the difficult thing repeatedly when no one is grading you on it, is its own kind of intelligence, not the kind that scores well on tests, the kind that knows which documents to keep, which questions to ask, when to stay quiet, and when to speak. Aunt Carol has it. My father had it in his own way. I think I inherited some of it, and I think the years of careful, unglamorous work sharpened what was already there. But the hardest part wasn't the legal process. It was Brooke's kitchen. Sitting across from her, watching her realize that the life she'd been performing had been built on a foundation her mother controlled and concealed. That took something from me that had nothing to do with paperwork. It took the willingness to cause pain in order to stop a larger harm. I didn't want to be the person who blew up her anniversary plans. I didn't want to be anyone's villain. But I had watched my father protect the truth his entire life, quietly and at real cost to himself, and I understood that the moment you decide the truth is only worth telling when it's comfortable, you've already started becoming someone else. Brooke planted the dogwood. That's the detail I hold on to, not the legal outcome, not the estate settlement, not the house with the oak tree. Though all of it matters, the dogwood, planted by her husband and her kids in their backyard, grown from the same window where my father died. She didn't have to tell me. She sent a photo anyway. That's what happens when you stop performing for each other and start actually looking. It takes longer than you want. It costs more than seems fair. But what comes out the other side is the only kind of relationship that holds, the kind that knows what it survived to get there. My father knew that. He left me the money, yes. But what he really left me was the proof that someone saw clearly, told the truth in ink, and trusted it to last. It lasted.